to the session. So welcome everyone for the second half of the reference training for NACO, and this part is the NACO conference name reference and also cross-reference. And our trainer is Jocelyn Zoom. And this session is a project by both CTP and NACO, CJK NACO joint session. I think most people attended the last session, so I think people when you have questions, you can just using the chat room type in your questions. Some of the questions, if you need a longer answer, we will save until the end of the session. And if you have questions afterwards, you can always send email for questions. And we have to have some exercise during the session, and we were using the choices that you will see on the what you call the panel under the participants. There are 4 little boxes. First one is what JP just said, the smiling face. And the last one, right now you can see a check mark. It could turn to ABC, and then you can pick the one for answer. So just click A or B or C and for your answer. So when we need to do exercise. That's all I need to say. Okay, let me just turn to Jocelyn for the training.
Thanks, Shuying and Shi. Welcome back, everybody. And as Shuying mentioned, this is the second part of our corporate name references. And as you all have gone through that, we discussed in detail about the NACO CJK corporate name references. Today we are going to focus on conference name references as well as the COSO references for both corporate and conference name references. Now before we get started, again, those 2 familiar reminders. First, the rules and examples we will be dealing with today are under the principle of AACR2. So this session does not touch on RDA resource description access at all, which is the future upcoming cataloging instruction. Second, not all the examples discussed here are live examples from the database, although most of them are. So don't be surprised if you cannot find the exact record in the OCLC connection or WorldCat. Now, I also want to mention that from the last session, we have had questions asking if I could talk about why a heading is entered, say, directly or subordinately. In other words, heading entry or entry of the heading. Due to the limited of time, what we are focusing on in these sessions are references. So we're really not going in detail to explain about a heading which is 1XX. But if you have questions which are not covered in the session, including choice of headings 1XX, please feel free to send them on the registration page or just contact the organizers. So I just want to keep you in mind that we are not going to focus on the details of 1XX. It's about references. As we have discussed in our earlier session about the MARC authority format for corporate body, as you have known, there are 3 types of MARC format on entering corporate headings. And the first type of MARC format is 110, first indicator 2, second indicator blank. For corporate body, entered directly. And then the second type of MARC format for a corporate body authority record is entered under 110, first indicator 1 and the second indicator blank. And again, this is for bodies, for corporate body entered subordinately. Now, then the third type of format is for conferences, and that is entered under mark tag 111, first indicator 2. So pay attention to the conference area, which we will be spending a lot of time in this session. And then if you look down on the end of the second bullet, we have three types of mark format similarly to the headings in terms of references. The first one for references entered directly, and that's coded under 410 first indicator 2. And the second type of reference is for references entered under jurisdiction, and that's coded under 410 first indicator 1. And then we have the conference references, which is the direct entry, and that's under 411 first indicator 2. So if you notice, for regular corporate body names, we have two types of format in terms of reference structure, 410.2, 410.1. But for conference reference, we only have one type, which is coded under 411 first indicator 2. Now, if you look at the last bullet, and this is where we're also going to spend much of the time in this session, and that is the COSO 5XX. And again, similar to the 4XX cross-reference, we have the 410 indicator 2 structure for COSO reference entered directly. And then we have 410.1 for COSO reference entered under jurisdiction. And then the last one is for COSO reference for conferences, which is entered in a direct order, which we also call it here direct entry, and that is 511.2. Now, where to add, or do we consider adding references, including COSO references? Basically, there are three areas when we need to consider adding references. The first one, when you have different forms of the heading. So in other words, if you have a variant form of your 1XX, including the variant form in different languages. So that's one area we would start to consider giving the references for a corporate body. And then the second area where we need to consider references is because the rule tells us to do so. So in other words, it's rule-generated references. Now, the two differences I want to point out here is that for the first type of references, which is the variant form references, you need to have that evidence in the source. So in other words, you need to cite that in the 670 field. What are the variant forms, and why you add it in the 4XX? And then for the rule generated, as you know, because the rule tells us to do so, so it's not necessarily that you have to justify it in the 670 field. And then the third category when we need to consider references is when you have relationships, when you see relationships between different bodies. And that's when we start to code or consider 5XX. So we're going to also spend some time in this category. Now, where you can find all the rules to support or to find out whether you need to provide so-and-so cross-references. There are three areas. The first one is in the AACR2 chapter 24, even though normally people wouldn't think that would also include information or instructions about references, but yes, indeed there is. And then the other two areas you want to go to is the LC Rule Interpretation, Chapter 24, and then and also in the LC rule interpretation under Chapter 26.3. So those are the areas where you can go and find the reference rules. Now, conferences are a type of corporate body. So most cross-reference rules applying for corporate body also apply to conferences. For example, you will have variant forms, as we mentioned. You might have variant language forms, and sometimes you need to have the direct entry cross-reference for a body that's entered subordinately. And then sometimes you will also consider inverted forms. All these cross-references are can be considered or are possibilities for conference references. And let's go in detail and look at each specific area. The first one is for conference references provided from a variant form. So if you look at the record in this screenshot here, which is also pointed out in the red line, you will see several cross-references provided for this conference name, and including the different language forms. So we're not going into detail, but just so you know, when you have variant forms for a conference name, that's when you start to consider conference references. Conference references in terms of, let me say this, conference references inverted forms. Now remember from the last session, we talked about corporate references inverted forms. And if you can recall, there were two types of inverted references that can be provided through a corporate body name. Similarly, we have two types of inverted references that need to be considered or can be considered in the conference reference area. And as we are showing here on this slide, the first situation that you can consider an inverted reference for a conference name is when the heading begins with the name of the sponsor. So in other words, a conference name starts with the name of the sponsor, not anything else. So whenever you have a name that's within this category, which begins with the name of the sponsor, that's when you start to alert yourself, okay, this might start to, this made me to start to think of providing an inverted reference. The second area where we need to consider an inverted reference for a conference name is when you have a word such as conference, symposium, workshop, any type of word for conference, which is not the first element of the heading. And that's when you start to consider providing inverted references. So we're going to go in detail to look at each area. Two couple of reminders here before we go on to look at each type. The first one, which you are also seeing here, which is under the second bullet on our screen here. And it says that do not make inverted cross-references from subject words for conference names. If you recall, the two types of inverted references that we talked about for corporate names is one of them is providing cross-references from subject words. But here it says it does not apply for conference names. So keep in mind this one little reminder here. And then the second reminder, or maybe the second criteria if you say it, is that if you have a conference name that includes qualifiers, when you provide inverted references, do not add those qualifiers to your inverted references. So we're going to look at each specific area, and then we're going to look at exercises to test our knowledge on those areas. So first, let's take a look at the first situation where we need to consider providing inverted reference. And again, it's from the first word following the name of the sponsor, when the name of the sponsor is the first element of the conference name. So as we looked at from the previous slide, this is how you make inverted reference, which is to provide a reference from the first word following the name of the sponsor. So let's take a look at our example here. And this is Chinese Geographical Society, I believe, and it's academic seminar or meeting. And if you see from the heading and you see the characters and you see the red circled area, the cataloger provided a cross-reference from the first word, the very first word, right after the name of the sponsor, which is Chinese Geographical Society. So that is to begin by BINGCHUAN and so on. Okay, so the cataloger did a good job, provided a correct inverted reference. Okay, so that's our first type of inverted references for conferences, for conference names. Now let's look at our second type of inverted references for conference names. Provide a inverted reference from the generic term, such as meetings, conferences, workshops, seminars. So we say this is the generic term. Provide a inverted reference from this generic term when this generic term or word is preceded by a word that may not be recognized as part of the conference name. So in other words, a conference name that you are having, it doesn't start out with anything that sounds like a conference name. And so the rule tells us to make an inverted reference from that generic term that indicates that this heading is for a conference. So let's look at an example here on the screenshot. From the Chinese characters in the last 2-4-11, you can see this is a seminar. And also you may recognize the first two letters indicating this is a person's name. And so, you know, the generic term for conference has been put away behind all the other terms that do not really are not really identified as a part of the conference name. So this name also within the category of the second type of inverted reference. So in other words, we would need to provide an inverted reference from that generic term seminar. And as you see the red circle here, YANTAOHUI is that generic term. And then we made a reference by inverting the order based on the generic term. Okay, so these are the two types of inverted references provided for conference names. Now let's take a look at some examples, or actually not examples. We're going to have some exercises for you to do to test your knowledge on inverted references. So let's look at our first exercise. We have a heading and a couple of references provided for you already. And then we have two choices for you to decide which inverted reference forms are the correct ones. So you can pick your choice. Let's start.
just to interrupt, so once you have answer, just click that little icon has the A letter A on it. I mean, choose A, B, A or B.
Remember the two situations where you need to consider. The keys are the name of the sponsor, and so that's one area you want to consider where that is. And the other situation you want to consider is the generic term and where did that reside. So based on those two, and you can test yourself of these two choices. Okay, I see quite a few. Okay, let's go ahead and see how well we did on this exercise. All right, we do have the majority of the audience that picked choice A, and let's see if that is the correct answer here. Yes, indeed, most of you have gotten the correct answer. So let's take a look and see. Take a look at these choices and see why these choice A is correct and choice B is not quite correct. Now, let's look at the first 11 in choice A. Conference. Okay, that's the generic term. And so if you look at 111 again on the top of the slide, you see the university is the beginning word. So it's the first element being the sponsoring body. And then the conference. And then you have another word, international, which really is not identified as a part of the name of the conference. So I got both criteria met. So I'm providing two inverted references. One is entered under the generic term, because this generic term is preceded by all these university internationals which are not identified as part of the conference name. So the first 11 is correct. The second 11, remember we talked about if the name starts with the name of the sponsor, provide the inverted reference from the first word following the name of the sponsor. Yes, so we have the second cross references provided, entered under international by inverting the name of the university after the comma, which is the name of the sponsor. So choice A, both inverted references are correct. Now let's take a look at choice B. Why choice B is not quite correct? The first 11, what do you see there? Okay, if you look at the first choice, it might remind you that what we have talked about in our earlier sessions, we do not provide a variant form from a invariant form. So this 411 inverted reference apparently is from the reference, the first 411 on the top of the screen there. So this is not quite right. Of course, the second 11 is the same, and that is correct. So overall, choice B is not a correct answer. Okay, most of you have done very well, so let's move on to the next exercise, and let's see how well you do on this one. For those of you who don't read the Japanese language, we have a little hint here. So it's the organization that's called Center for Near East Asia and Africa Research, and then we have a symposium. So let's start. Again, those two situations where you need to consider a inverted reference for conference, and see if the choices here, both for 11 actually, if they met those two criteria. Okay, let's see how many have responded here. Very good. I will see a lot of good responses. Everybody has picked choice A. Wow, this is a predominant choice here. Boy, all of you have gotten the correct answer. Well done. And so just go over briefly. It seems that you all have grasped the inverted reference knowledge quite well, so we're not going to spend more time here. Just briefly, for 11, the reference was provided from the first word following the name of the conference, following the name of the sponsor, NEA. The second cross-reference was provided under the generic term because the conference name did not start with the generic term, which stands for conference. There is something else. So we need to provide an inverted reference starting with this generic term. So well done, everybody. One more before we move on, and let's go over this quickly. Is this reference, which is the first 411 in the screenshot you see here, is that a correct inverted reference? Let's start. Yeah, this can be a good test because everything is in the non-Latin Romanized form. So it's kind of deceptive sometimes when you try to reconfigure the component which is equivalent to what we say in the rule, which is in the English format. So, okay, lots of you have made choices, have made up your mind. So let's look at how well we did on this one. All right, almost everybody picked choice B, and let's see if that is indeed correct. Yes, indeed, you are correct. Because why? We do not make inverted cross-references for the conference names from subject words. Yes, you all got that. All right, let's move on to the next type of conference references, and that is named conference. Before we get on to the named conference, I want you to think back and to try to memorize what we have covered when we talked about corporate references. Remember, when we talked about corporate references, we touched briefly about the subordinate body entry because you have to deal with the entry first, and based on the entry, you consider the references. So we talked briefly at our last session about subordinate entries, and here I want to remind you, and that is chapter 24.13 for corporate bodies or non-government corporate bodies entered subordinately, type 6, which is for bodies entered under its entire name. All right, so that's type 6. Now, interestingly enough, the named conferences or for meetings, we do actually fall or apply type 6 for bodies entered subordinately. So here, the rule tells us that enter a meeting subordinately under the name of the corporate body if the name contains, in addition to the name of the corporate body or the sponsoring body, no more than a generic term for the meeting. So that's what it is about. Named meeting entered subordinately under the name of the body. And then we will need to make a cross-reference directly under the meeting name. So let's look at our screenshot here again. First, if you can all recognize in the second 410 in the Chinese characters, you know right away this is a conference name. And if you checked out the 670 field here, and if you try to compare with the first 110, for those of you who don't read the Chinese romanization or the pinyin form, you can see the entire name of the corporate body has presented in the 670 or in the source. So yes, indeed, for this type of conference name, it falls into this 24.13 type 6 rule is for named meetings entered subordinately under the parent body or under the corporate body. So that's why you see this meeting name is entered under 110.2 instead of 111. And our reference rule for conference names here is to provide a cross-reference directly under the meeting name. So you see the red circle here is a direct entry form under 411 for a conference name entered directly. Okay, so that's about the conference references on the named conference area. And let's see if we have an exercise. Yes, we do. So we have an exercise here, and we want you to decide whether this conference name should be entered as a named conference under the corporate body, and what type of references you want to consider for this conference name. So let's start this exercise. I hope the Chinese characters that's used sort of as a translation helps you to navigate through the 670s and also making your choices. Okay. Lots of you have made choices, have made up your mind. Okay, let's take a look and see how you all did. All right, again, the majority has chosen A. So let's see if A is indeed the correct choice. Yes, indeed, it's the correct choice. So I see you have learned the concept about the named conference. Basically, when you have an entire name of the corporate body, and in addition to the entire name of the corporate body, you have the generic term or something similar as a generic term, and no more than other kind of element that's involved for this conference name. And that's when you want to consider the conference name entered under 110.2, which is the corporate body. So that's why we have 110.2 here under the corporate body. And then we provide a direct or a reference entered directly for its entire conference name. And as you see here, yes, the references was provided this way. I was debating when I was looking at this example. I think another way, in my opinion, providing a cross-reference for the conference name in its direct entry under 411.2 would be provided and would be entered under the corporate body together without a subtool B in its entirety. So that would be another way that you would provide a cross-reference for a conference name in its direct entry. Okay, so a little bit of thoughts that I had, and I thought I would want to share it with you. And let's see, we have something else for you to see. Anything that's, okay, let's look at this one here. Do you think the cataloger made the right decision on choosing the 1XX here? And as a result, what about the 410? As you know, references always have to, we always have to consider the heading 1XX before we even consider the references. So let's look at this exercise and give your best shot. Okay, shall we talk about this one? All right, okay. Now we have a little bit of a division here. More than half of the respondents have chosen A, but quite a few number of people chose B. So let's see why is A and why is not A, and also why is B or why is not B. So first let's look at the correct answer here. Okay, so indeed, more than half of the people have chosen the correct answer, but a lot of you did consider this is incorrect. Why? All right, now this is a little bit deceiving, as you see. We have Tokyo University here. Okay, so that's the name of the corporate body. So we are starting to look at a named conference reference, the possibility there. Okay, now then there is a word which I translated here as industry. Okay, so you see the word industry. And then you have the seminar. So in addition to the name of the corporate body, as well as the generic term seminar, what else do we have here? We have quite a significant word here, which is industry. Okay, I'm sure you all agree with me here. So with this significant word here, this conference is showing that it's a conference in the subject area of industry. So it really has spoken beyond just a generic term or generic conference. So the cataloger did a good job in choosing the correct direct entry form for this conference heading. So that's why this is a correct heading form and the answer is true. All right, so let's say if we remove this word KOGAKU, which stands for industry, so you don't have anything substantial or significant here. Simply then you would have left here would be the name of the corporate body and the generic term seminar. But that's not what we're having here. We have much more. We actually have much more significant word than just a generic term. All right. Okay. So this is why we have we have choice A here, which is a correct heading form for this conference name, entered directly. All right. The next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about a couple of special categories. Again, we don't have luxury to go in details about each type, but I thought these two types are sometimes confusing areas where catalogers might struggle. You know, is this a subject heading that needs to be established, or how am I going to consider a an exhibition, when you say, do an art catalog. So these are the next couple of slides we're showing here are the special categories. And the reason being special categories is also because these two exhibitions and the next slides would be expeditions. These two areas are really considered under the ambiguous entities. So in other words, people do have confusion how in cataloging world is treated for exhibition and expedition. So here we have a slide, and it tells that exhibitions is considered as a named conference under the same principles applying to conference. So if you look at our example here in this screenshot, you will see this is an exhibition, and the cataloger again formulated correctly in the 111, treating this name as a conference. Okay, so that's correct. Now, one thing I want to mention it to you is, and sometimes people do overlook at this criteria, and that is for exhibitions, unless it's recurring. Okay, remember, unless it's recurring, it will not be considered as a conference, and it cannot be established as a conference. All right, so it's your judgment when you have a source or publication in hand to decide whether the exhibition is recurring. If it's recurring, yes, you would consider that as a conference name and set up the heading and the 111. If it's not, then situation can vary. For example, if the exhibition is owned by a corporate body, then that would be a 110 and corporate body entry type of heading. But situations vary, but usually for recurring criteria, once you make a decision, you will know whether you need a 111 or not. So basically, that's the most commonly occurred situation you want to consider. And when you get into more complicated situations, then you can go on. And we're not going to go in detail just on exhibition today. So the other special area we want to talk about here is expeditions. Just like exhibitions, treat expeditions under the general principles for conference names. So again, when you have an name, the name as a expedition established the name of the expedition under 111 as a named conference. Now there are two examples here, and you see right away, one is a setup under 111.2, the other is a setup under 110.2. So why are they set up differently, and why? Let's look at the first 670 here, and you see after sub B TP, the citation here simply says this is a sucrose expedition, nothing else. And then another location of the source tells us when it took place. So basically, these are the information you have. So you just have a name of an expedition. So then you set up the name of the expedition under 111. Nothing else, is straightforward. Now, if you look at the second example, why it's entered under 110, the last 670 might give you some clue there. So you have the source that indicates it's Kyoto University Scientific Expedition. All right, so right away you see, oh, it's name of the sponsor. Okay, named conference. Yeah, so it all applies to that 24.13 type 6. So it's entered under corporate body under 110. All right, so there are two situations where there are two types of entries where you would consider on entering expeditions. One is entered directly as a meeting name under 111, and the other is under 110 under the corporate body name or the name of the corporate body. Okay. And the reason why expeditions are treated this way, I think it has to do with the nature of the body, how it's appeared. So usually you have an expeditions and you do have the name of the corporate body usually following along in the name of the expeditions. So the rule falls into the name of the conference, and then you have a 110 category. So that's how I see it, why we have two sets of or two different ways of establishing an expedition. All right, now time for an exercise. Take a look at the 670 information provided here and mark your choice of A and B. See how we are doing in this area. Let's start. Remember, we have two types of entries in terms of entering expeditions. One is entered under corporate body, and check it out and see if the information provided here falls into the criteria for that type. And the other one is direct entry, and see if this goes well. It's a little bit tricky here because we're dealing with all three languages. Unless you read all three languages or you're pretty good at guessing out the three different languages, I understand it takes a little while. So so don't worry about it. Try, give your best shot. Okay, many of you have made your choices, and let's take a look. All right, again, almost the majority respondents have chosen choice A. All right, and see if we're all correct or not. Most of you have chosen the correct answer. Okay, so just to explain, just to reiterate why it's choice A, not choice B. Okay, apparently we have the corporate name appeared in the name of the expedition. So that falls into the criteria for type 6 named meeting, okay, under 24.13. All right, so it's entered under 110.2. All right. I think actually I made a mistake here, if you have caught that. It should be 411 because this would be a, I'm going to make a note here, because this would be a expedition entered as a named meeting in its direct entry. So for a direct meeting name, it's 411, not 410. Okay, I apologize for this error. Okay, and again, I might have fixed this in some version, but maybe I mixed with different versions over time. Anyway, if you could also make a note here, okay, this should be 411 for the cross-reference under choice A. And similarly, for choice B and 110, really it should be 111. Because it's treated as a meeting name entered in its direct entry. All right. Okay, so now we know why choice A is the correct choice here. All right. You know, this is not something that's so complicated, but if we've never encountered this, if we've never, have had this kind of situation, we would not know how this would be, treated or worked out. so it's something I think it's useful once you know it. Okay, time to switch the gear. So far, we have been focusing on 4XX conference references, and as you remember, last session we covered exclusively on corporate body name references. But all those so far we have dealt with are 4XX references. Now let's spend some time on 5XX COSO references. There are two different areas where you would consider. Well, again, not the foundation, but the basic start to consider a COSO reference is when you see relationships between bodies, whether it's a corporate body, whether it's conferences or expeditions. When you see relationships between the bodies, that's a sign where you want to start to consider COSO references. Sometimes, or most of the times in my experience, where you know the earlier later relationships, and we're going to go in detail. I'm going to talk about these two situations just in a moment. But let's first take a look at the first big criteria. You know the earlier later relationships, so you're going to take care of that using 5XX COSO. And in other situations where you know there's relationships because you see different names and you know they're all referring to the same entity or the same corporate body, but they have used different names over time, but you have no clue or you don't have any information to really decide which one is early name, which one is later name. And so that's another situation where we want to consider using COSO references. So we're going to look at these two categories in the next several slides. And back to the earlier later relationships. Now this includes two areas. One is the name itself. The name you are working with itself involves name change situations. So we use COSO. So we're going to take a look at them in detail in this area. And another area sometimes people overlook that is when the name that you are dealing with is a subordinate body that has either a parent body qualifier or is entered subordinately under the parent body. And when that parent body name is changed, or we call it a controlling body, which I really don't like the term here that's being used, but when that parent body name is being changed, that's when we also need to consider using 5X to connect the earlier later situation. I know this sounds a little bit involved, but let's see how you do. I think once you see examples, it's not that hard. So let's spend the next several slides on the 5XX here. Now first, let's get rid of the very easy situation, in my opinion, which is to connect the headings without the use of subfield W in the 5XX, because you don't have a clear relationship between the names of the body. So here's a simple example. We have the university here, but I assume, I don't remember if this is a exact screenshot or I have modified, but let's take a look at these two records. Basically, these two records in the 670s, they're showing that, yes, the names has been used maybe interchangeably, but we really don't know which one is early name, which one is later name. So in this situation, we use a 510 without subfield W. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward, simple situation here. Now, also, as you know, if you have some earlier later name situations, especially for those of you who have been creating name authority records. That's not something new, and I'm not going to spend any time on those. So we are actually going to look at some of the more complex name change situations here. And this is the first one. Names undergoing changes multiple times. Okay, so you look at the slides here. We have 4 corporate names involved. Okay, and on the left-hand side, the red arrow is pointing to the later name, and to the right-hand side, the upper green arrow is pointing to the earlier heading or the earlier name. So you see from this kind of little chart or whatever the diagram here, you can see how we should connect between the different names or the name change situations, right? Okay. One thing please keep in mind is that you want to connect only to its immediately adjacent heading. The word adjacent, I'm sure you all know that, okay, right next to each other. So you want to deal with the name that's right next to that name. You don't want to jump around just because they're all for the same body or for the same institute, so-called. All right, so if we look at our real example here, the first name, okay, you're not going to see my arrow here, but try to follow as I speak along. You see the first name here. It has changed name once to the second name. So we're at the second name. So for the first name, it has only a later name relationship to the second name. And that's all you need to take care of in terms of the first name. All right. Now continue on for the second name. Because we just talked about there is an earlier name for this second name. So this second name needs an earlier relationship back to the first name. But for the second name, it did not end there. Remember, connect to its immediately adjacent heading. So for the second name, we actually have two-way relationships. So in other words, we have an earlier name and later name both to this second name. So in other words, in your records for the second name authority record, you would connect both earlier and later names. All right, so you have a WA and WB situation. And exactly the same situation applies to our third name here. So we're at the third name here. The third name also has both earlier and later name relationship to its immediately adjacent name. Now similarly to the very first name, our last name, which is the latest name, only goes back. So we only connect back to its earlier name, which is the third name here. Did you see how this rule applies? Connect only to its immediately. So in a way, you have multiple names, but you don't really connect all these together. You only connect to its immediately adjacent heading. All right, so you can go back and study a little bit more about this diagram if you find it helpful. All right, so this is one complex situation that I want to share it with you. And the other special situation where I think you might run into, or I definitely think this is going to be very helpful, because I think sooner or later you're going to run into that. This is where we can find the instruction. This is how we are working it out. If you have a name that's not likely going to be needed, so one is not going to be likely needed, the rule under LCRI, or rule interpretation under 26.3 BC, tells us if you have a name, if you are establishing a name, but this name is not likely going to be used, and usually this is the earlier name, that's the earlier name to the name that you are establishing, then your choice is to not have to establish that earlier name. Instead, you can cite in a special phrase, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, in the 670 field for the source found. All right, so a little bit of phrase here, as you see under the first bullet. The word or the phrase you are going to pick up in this situation is, in the bracket, you will say no pubs in OCLC database or WorldCat, whichever database that you are working with. Okay, so that's one situation where you do not have to establish the name change. And the rule tells us this should only be applied when the earlier name is not found. All right, so let's see, let's look at our example here. In the last 670, okay, I'm going to wait until this timer goes away so that, okay, there we go. In the last 670 here, you see no pops in WorldCat. So it's an animation program, all right, and then the animation program later on became animation school, as you see the second 410 here. Okay, so animation school is something that you are establishing, but along the way you found out animation program, this other name, was being used, and it's the former name for animation school. And you check the database, there was nowhere that animation program has been used in either bib record or in the name authority file. So in this case, you can apply this rule under RI 26.3 to indicate that relationship in the 670 field without establishing a separate name authority record. Okay. So that's an area I think should be useful. Another more complex situation I want to talk about here is about merging names. Okay, now the diagram here easily tells you what are the relationships about here. Okay, you have A, B, C. All three corporate bodies or all three bodies have a relationship with the fourth body, which is body B. Okay, so right away you know how you are going to set this up between the A and D, and between B and D, and between C and D in all three separate authority records. Now what I want to mention here is, keep in mind here, if you look at A, B, and C, they do not have a relationship between each other. So in other words, you do not connect between A, B, and C. Okay, there's no relationship whatsoever when you look at A, B, and C. You only see the relationship in your record for A, B, and C with number D or with body D. All right, so that makes a little sense here, right? Okay. A little bit more about merging names. Here actually we have both merging and splitting, okay? And I actually say this is only part of the name change for this big body. So this big body is quite complex, but we're only going to show you only a portion or a glimpse of this body name change. You see the very left column. I don't have a column here, but just for demonstration purpose, you see we have three columns here. The left column, the center column, and the right column. And if you see the name in the center column, excuse me. If you see the name in the center column, you see the first name on the upper, on the top is changed from an earlier name. All right. And if you look at the name on the bottom in the center column, that name is merged. Okay, it's merged from two earlier names. Okay, and then that body did not end there. That body split later on into two different bodies. So what you see here is pretty much a more complex merging and splitting name situations. And my advice to you is the best way to handle this is to write down all the names and write down all the arrows that you can possibly write down correctly. And then based on the relationships in between the names, according to the arrows that you draw, you set up a WA or WB, or WA, WA, or WB, WB. You can have more than one WA in one record, and you can have more than one WB in one record. So this is sort of a best way to tackle this kind of complex name merging situation. All right. I see some questions that have coming in. I think we are about on our last topic, or last few topics I have to say, and then we'll come back to the question. All right. Okay. Since we have gone up, audience in the panel. I apologize, I haven't seen this early enough. I see you have questions on the previous slides, which we have gone, away quite a bit. So we will come back to talk about those two questions after we finish the presentation here. All right. So those are the complex situations for COSO. All right. And here is something that's in a separate category, but still in the complex COSO situations. Remember, we talk about if you have a name itself that involves name change, so you deal with the name. And another situation you deal with a name change situation using 5XX is when you have a body that is entered subordinately, and when that parent body name starts to have name change, that's when you need to come back to consider 5XX. And the other situation, more complex situation involving parent body name change, is when you have a name that includes a qualifier containing the parent body. So those are the two situations we are going to look at it. And I consider those are more complex situations. And again, you are going to use early latest COSO 5XX to connect the headings in those two situations. So let's look at more in detail of both situations. The first situation, when you have a heading that's a subordinate entry. So let's look at our screenshots, two records here, and see where and why we are making earlier later COSO references. Let's look at our second record at the bottom here. If you look at 110, the parent body is Hong Kong. And as you know, the name of Hong Kong has been changed to Hong Kong, China. All right. Now here, a cataloger is establishing or working with the Office of the Commissioner of Insurance. Okay, so this is the subordinate body the cataloger is working with. But unfortunately, I have to say, because you're going to deal with this more complex situation. So unfortunately, this body is entered subordinately, and you have to deal with this name change because your parent body name has changed. So let's check it out and see how the treatment is done. So according to the rule, if you have a subordinate body that's entered when the parent body name has changed, we use the 5XX. So if you look at the red circle toward the bottom of the screen, indeed, the name of the parent body has been changed to Hong Kong, China. And if you see far right, it's coded under WB because that's the latest name of the parent body. Alright, so that's the name that you have concluded with. And remember, very early on, when we talked about the cross-references in the corporate body, I don't remember if I actually mentioned it. Okay, if I didn't, this is where that I want to emphasize. For the 5XX, usually you have a reciprocal heading. So in other words, you can't just have a 5XX living in one record without having another record referring to this 5XX. So here the cataloger is completing his or her job by setting up the other heading. And as you see, the heading was set up under 110 for the latest parent body name under Hong Kong, China. And then that's the subordinate body the cataloger is actually working with. And again, the 510 at the bottom of the first record is referring under WA to its earlier name. So overall, these two records with both 510, the cataloger have taken care of the parent body name change for its subordinate body. Does that make sense to you? Alright, so this is that. Now another situation for parent body name change is when you have a subordinate body with a qualifier that's entered under parent body. So let's check out our example here on the first 110 and then the second 110. The note here saying Beijing Medical College has changed to Beijing Medical University. Okay, so what we have here is the hospital under that medical college or university. So really we are dealing with the second tier, the subordinate body. But because this subordinate body hospital is entered directly with a qualifier of its parent body, and when we found out that this parent body or its parent body's name has been changed, then we need to apply this rule using 5XX and establish a new heading and connect the two headings with the 5XX. Okay, so these are the two situations where we need to consider 5XX also references when the parent body name change. I have to say these are sometimes really being overlooked. So really people don't know how these treatments should be done, but this actually is the way to go. Alright, now time for exercises. Alright, we have 110, 410, and we have lots of information here. Okay, very quickly, okay, if you want to see, the two screenshots here are for parent body. Alright, and then we have our record and the 110, 410 on the very top. So the question for you is, how are you going to connect the two headings when there's a parent body name change for our 110 here? Two choices. Let's start. I wish we could interact. You know, there are times that I just want to ask your question, or I just want to hear what your questions are so that we can continue on with this exercise. And all of a sudden I realize actually I just have to be silent. a look at our answers here and see how well you absorb the knowledge in this area. And if we could see the result. Oh, very few. I see this is challenging. I apologize. Partially it's because I had a hard time trying to make this work. And I think the presentation here, the display here, is not very user-friendly. So you probably have had a hard time trying to actually find out what's going on here. Okay, let's go over this example or this exercise together. All right, the first one, okay, the very top of the page in different color or in this green or turquoise, whichever, the color here is the name heading that we are working with. And right away, you see the name is entered subordinately. All right, and I gave the script here so you have a better idea what this is about. And then I have the two screenshots here showing that the parent body for this unification institute has undergone name change. And then we want to find out how are we going to update our heading and set up new heading correctly using 5XX due to the parent body name change. So let's look at our answer here. So apparently number A is the correct answer. So let's look at what's involved in number A. All right, number A, and choice A, okay. The first one, I think A and B. A and B is a little off here, so we could have moved down a little bit. But I know you are following me here. Let's look at our first block, the first block here. Under 110, we have the parent body name, okay. And then we have the subordinate body, so nothing new is there. And then the cataloger added 510 for its later name of the parent body. And then, of course, the subordinate body, encoded under WB. So that's correct, all right. No, actually, I am correct. Okay, so both of these should be considered. No, 410. This is 110. Yeah, it should be 110. The 410 here should be 110. All right. Sorry for this confusion here. Okay, so we have the second 110 here in the second block. And as you see, this is the later name of the parent body. All right. And then the cataloger connected under a 510 to its earlier name of the parent body and coded under WA. So indeed, the cataloger was correct in connecting these two. So the choice is A. All right.
Jimmy,
okay.
there is a comment on the slides.
Okay. Yes, I have just realized it. You are absolutely, TJ, you are absolutely correct. I know when we did review, you always ask good questions. Yes, indeed, you are correct here. It should be 110. Okay, yeah. When later on, when the organizers send out the PDF file, I suggest PDF file or PowerPoint. I'm going to make the corrections here, so you will see the correct display here. Okay. All right. So let's move on to see another example here. And this one, I want to test you about a subordinate body that includes a qualifier with its parent body. And when that parent body name or when its parent body name has gone name change, how are we dealing with here? So as you see, we have a choice here already made by the cataloger, or I added. And you can judge whether I did a correct job or not. Let's start. Okay, I can see the benefit of a much clearer slide that I made on this one than the previous one. Okay, all right. Most of you have gotten choice B, all right. Thank you. And let's check it out. Indeed, yes, you all are correct. Okay, all right. I think it's the slide that's going to improve your learning. It's not, you know, you don't have any problem grasping these rules. It really was the not very ideal slide from the previous page that I made. Okay, so that's an improvement. Okay, why is it a false? Why I didn't do it correctly here? All right, as you know, the parent body name has undergone changes. So we need to have used 5XX instead of 410. So obviously you all have gotten it, and I'm not going to go into detail about how to work this out. I'm sure you have grasped this knowledge already. Something that's also related about 5XX, and that is the 675 justification field that I want to mention here. Again, if you check the rule interpretation and the 26.3, if the source, what you have, only gives or only provides earlier or later name, but not a heading, that's when you justify that name using 675 field, not 670. All right, so keep in mind when you have a source that only provides either earlier or later name, which is 5XX. So only speaks about 5XX. In that case, consider 670 field, not 670. Consider 675 field, not 670 field. All right. I added this slide because very often we get questions, how are we going to cite internet resources? There isn't any magic rule. Basically, you want to follow the right structure. A, subfield full title of the internet resource, and subfield B for location within the resource. And I consider this is the key wording here, location within the resource. So if you look at the last or the third 670 field here for title of the internet resource, for example, the cataloger is citing IEEE homepage. As you know, it's a huge and very deep homepage. And if the cataloger is trying to justify something under a subpage, what do they do? And that's where we often get questions, and catalogers are confused. You know, how am I going to do? So basically, you want to keep in mind the B subfield, you would need to cite the location within that main page. So in other words, if you get that information from the conferences and events page, you can cite that. If you get the information from so-and-so subpage, you cite so-and-so subpage. So basically, that's where I see, you know, the question comes from. And I hope this slide and examples give you some ideas on how to cite internet resources in the 670 field. One thing I want to mention is that sometimes you see catalogers citing URI in the subfield U. The rule or the DCM or whatever you say, you are allowed to do that, but use your conscience or use your best judgment when you cite those resources or the actual URLs, because chances are some of the URLs might have gone changes over time. So it's not going to be realistically helpful. So that's another reason that we allow catalogers to use it, but it's not something that, in my opinion, encouraging. So so use your judgment when using or applying the subfield U. I think, this is all. With all those rules, we have concluded all what we need to talk about in terms of 4XX and 5XX for the sessions, actually for the entire series of sessions. Okay, one last reminder. before you consider anything, make sure you search. Make sure you avoid conflict. So searching is actually the very first step. And when you start to provide references, make sure you follow instructions. As we mentioned earlier, examples can be misleading, not necessarily all incorrect, but can be misleading. So be sure you have the instructions and documentations in hand when you are in doubt. Okay, with that, I want to thank everybody for participating in the actual session. And back to slides, a couple of questions, and I think we can answer it. Slide number first, I think Mr. Morimoto has the first question, and then we have another section from Cao. Let me bring out slide 16, if I can see it. And 11, 12. I'm using my elementary knowledge here. Okay, this is the one. All right. Mr. Morimoto had a question, and it's a very good question. Now, as you see, this conference name does not have any qualifiers. All right. When do we set up conference names under AACR2 without qualifiers? Ongoing conferences. Right? Yes. So I assume this is ongoing conferences. But if you look at the 670 field, it doesn't really indicate any frequency and everything. So the information here is a little bit off. So when I designed this or took out this record, I think I could have modified a little to add the qualifier and the 110 and 411. So I think that will make this heading more complete. All right. So yes, that's a good question. And let's look at Jia Xia's Cao's question, and that's number 26. Let's see. I hate to spend wasting all this time trying to look for things. All right, there we go. I got it right away. All right. Now, Cao's question is, because she has the knowledge of the names, she was wondering if this name actually also should include another name, which is Central University. Yes. Keep in mind, some of the screenshots are really simplified screenshots. It's not really for the complete record. So the screenshots here that I have been using throughout all these sessions are for demonstrating purpose. So really, you would not see the exact record, and I'm not taking all the fields. But you are correct, Cao. These records do involve another name, which is Central University. All right. But for demonstrating purpose here, I did not add all the information. Yes, a good question. Do we have any other questions coming in? I do need to fix 2 slides which have errors. So thank you for the understanding. I'll pause for a couple of minutes. Shu-Yung, if you want to take over.
Excuse me. On your screen, you should see the link that is for feedbacks and comments, and you follow the link. You can feel to send us your comments and or questions. I hope you can all see that link. And also, I apologize for the confusing at the beginning of the wrong link to our site, but seems everyone made it to the current list link. So, and thanks everyone. That's all I need to say, and especially Jocelyn, who has been spending a lot of time to make those slides and to collect examples, and Denshi has been very helpful with the webinar technologies, and also coordinating the whole thing. So, and I hope we will have more similar sessions in the future.
Probably not in the near future. But,
in the near future.
I do want to say to all the audience, I hope you have learned some, and I hope you will carry some away and enjoy your name authority creation.
Yeah, and if you have ideas what kind of training that you would like to have, also let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Jocelyn, there's also one question on the TJ Gao, and I don't think he gave the slide number, so.
Yeah, it was a 14 thing. I think I pointed out right at that moment.
She did.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's already addressed.
Yeah, thanks, Shi, for mentioning it. Some of you who maybe have not caught it, I will update the material. So when you receive them, they are going to be correct. Thank you, teacher.
Yeah, the PowerPoint, the slides will be with the recording posted on the, I think the CTP's website. So the link will be sending out.
Thank you, everyone. Jocelyn, there's also one on the slide 34, 35. For the name change and the non-Latin script data, there's one should be deleted on the second one. Yeah, did you see that the non-Latin data there? 民族 民语.
I'm still checking there. Oh dear. Okay. All right. 民族
Yeah, 民族 I think it's 民语. Yeah.
I should take them out. But I found out last night that some of the changes I made disappeared. So I was afraid that I actually mixed with different versions when I updated.
Oh, okay.
So I apologize. Yes. That's slide 35 and 6, right? Or 4. Let's see.
Marie asking, can I also have a PPT slide with the recording? Yes, we will, and Jocelyn will making correction. After correction made, we will post it to the list and on the CTP website.
Sure, if you agree, would that look more professional if you post a PDF instead of a PowerPoint? I mean, I do not mind both ways, but if you choose, I will, make a PDF file and send it to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think a PDF is probably also less, the size is smaller.
That's true.
Yeah, and also include your note session.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Okay,
congratulations.
Thank you, Jocelyn. This is really good. Yeah. I learned it too.
I lost my voice at the beginning. Did you notice that? I was like, my poor thing, You just sounded so nervous.
I'm sorry. I need to stop recording.